There we go, there we go. Hey hoes, good morning. Hydrate and stretch, yes, yes, yes. Hello, Predo. Yes, yes, early reading for me. And bedtime reading for US folks. Hey Hosanna, good morning, Nathan. Hello, Kwali, how are you doing? Good morning, Tsuki. Good morning. Okay. Okay. Oh, I'm still tired, but that's okay. I can take a nap before going to work later. Also, I was looking forward to reading this. So, as usual, most redeems are turned off, except for Hydrate, Stretch, and Head Pets, basically. And Nico mode is still on. I might only notice after reading a passage though. Thank you for Head Pet, Shana. I will turn off BGM shortly. And yes, you need sleep to do stuff. Same goes for you. And then we will start reading. I won't be very responsive while in the midst of it, but I will look up every now and then to hydrate and stretch if you redeemed any, and to hydrate even if you don't redeem it, and to maybe answer the chat for a little bit, read people. Apart from that, it will be rather silent. Yes, bedtime story. Bedtime story, bedtime story. Okay. Yes. Good night, Crowley. Good night, Gianna. I hope you can fall asleep well to some read. So, as per request, we will be starting Heidi today. Will be interesting to read this. First of all, I've never read this story before. I only know some of the TV adaptations. Plus, of course, I've never heard any of it in English, so this is also gonna be interesting. Okay, shall we start? Oh, thank you, Quali. So, the book is actually has proper chapters, which is good. It has more than one part. There's two parts to the story of Heidi, actually. We will, of course, start with part one. Part 1. Heidi's Years of Learning and Travel. Chapter 1. The Alm Uncle. In the pleasantly situated old town of Meinfeld, a footpath leads up through shady green meadows to the foot of the mountain, which, as they gaze down on the valley, present a solemn and majestic aspect. Anyone who follows it will soon catch the pungent fragrance of grassy pasture land, for the footpath goes up straight and steep to the Alps. One bright, sunny June morning, a tall, sturdy-looking girl, evidently a native of the mountain, might have been seen climbing this narrow path. She led by the hand a little maiden, whose cheeks glowed as if a ruddy flame were under her dark brown skin. And what a wonder! In spite of the hot June sun, the child was bundled up as if for protection against the keenest cold. She could not have been 5 years old, but it was impossible to tell anything about her natural figure, for she wore 2 or 3 dresses, one for the other, and a big red cotton handkerchief around her neck. Her feet were lost in heavy hobnailed shoes. The little thing was quite formless as she made her hot and laborious way up the mountain. At the end of an hour of steady climbing, the two girls came to the hamlet that lies halfway up the arm, and is called Ndurfli, the little village. Here they were greeted from almost every cottage, and by everyone in the street, for the older of the two girls had reached her home. Nevertheless, she made no pause, but hurried on, answering all questions and greetings as she went. At the very end of the hamlet, as she was passing the last of the scattered cottages, a voice from the doorway cried, "Wait a moment, Dieter. I'll go with you, if you're bound up the mountain." The girl addressed stopped. Immediately the child withdrew her hand, sat down on the ground. "Are you tired, Heidi?" asked the companion. "No, I am hot," replied the little girl. "We are almost there," said her companion, encouragingly. "You must put out all the strength you have for a little while longer. It won't take us more than an hour." Just then a large, pleasant-looking woman came out of the cottage and joined them. The little girl jumped to her feet and followed the two women, who had instantly fallen into a lively conversation, greeting all the inhabitants of the hamlet and of the neighborhood. "But really, Dieter, where are you taking the child?" asked the newcomer. "It is your sister's little girl, isn't it? The orphan?" "Yes, it is," replied the other. "I am taking her up to her grandfather. She will have to stay there." "What? The little girl's going to live with the uncle? You must have lost your senses, Dieter. How can you think of doing such a thing? The old man will send you back with such a scheme as that." "I can't do it. He's her grandfather, and it is time for him to look out for her. I have had her till now. I must tell you, Barbara, that I could not think of letting her hinder me from taking such a place as I have just had offered me. Her grandfather must do his part now." "That's very well, if you were like other men," urged the portly Berber with some indignation. "But you know what he is. What will he do with a child, especially with such a young one? You won't hear of such a thing. But where are you going?" "To Frankfurt," said Dieter. "I have an extra good place there. The family was down at the baths last summer. I had charge of the rooms. I wanted Dan to take me back with them. I couldn't manage it, but they are here again this year. Still want me to go with them, and I am going. You may be sure of that." "I'm glad I'm not in the child's place," cried Berber with a gesture of repulsion. "Nobody knows what ails the old man up there. You'll have nothing to do with a living soul. From one end of the year to the other, he never sets a foot in a church, and if once in a 12-month he comes down with his thick staff, everyone keeps out of his way and is afraid of him. With his heavy grey eyebrows, his tremendous beard, he looks like a heathen and a savage. People are glad enough not to meet him alone." "Nevertheless," said Data stubbornly, "he's her grandfather, and it's his business to look after the child. He won't do her any harm. If he does, he will have to answer for it, not I." "I should like to know," said Babel insinuatingly. "I should really like to know what the old man has on his conscience that makes him look so fierce, and live all alone up there on the arm, and keep almost hidden from sight. People tell all sorts of stories about him. Of course you must know something about it, Data. Sister must have told you, hasn't she?" "Of course she has, but I held my tongue. If he should hear of it, I should suffer." But Babel had long desired to know the real cause of the uncle's peculiarity, and why it was that he looked so gloomy and lived alone by himself on the mountain, where people always spoke of him with bated breath, as if they were afraid to be against him, yet not say anything in his favor. Babel also was ignorant of the reason that all the people in the village called him the uncle, for, of course, he could not be the actual uncle of all the inhabitants, but as everyone called him so, She did the same, never spoke of the old man as anything else than Ohi, which is actually Ohi, which in the dialect of that region means uncle. Bärbel had only recently married into the village. Before that, her home had been down in the valley at Pratigau, and she was not familiar with all the happenings and all the curious characters of the village and the surrounding region through a long series of years. Her good friend Dete, on the contrary, was a native of the village, and had lived there till within a year. Then her mother had died. She had gone down to Ragaz, where the bars are, had found a fine position as chambermaid in a great hotel. She had come from Ragaz that very morning with their little girl, having had the chance to ride as far as Meienfeld on a hay wagon which an acquaintance of her was driving home. Bärbel thought that this was a good chance to find out something, and she was bound not to let it slip. She seized Diete's arm confidentially and said, "That one can learn the real truth from you instead of the gossip which is taught. I am sure you know the whole story. Come now, just tell me what is the matter with the old man. Has he always been so feared? Has he always been such a hermit?" "You can't tell whether he has always been so or not. I am 26 now, and he is certainly 70, and of course I never saw him when he was young. You might know that. If I were certain that he would never again be seen in all Pratigau, I might tell you all sorts of things about him. My mother was from Domnesc, and so was he." "There now, Dete, what do you mean?" exclaimed Bärbel, a little offended. "You need not be so severe on our gossip in Pratigau, and besides, I can't keep a secret or two if need be. Don't tell me, you shan't regret it." "Well then, I will. But mind you hold your tongue," said Dete warningly. Before she began, she glanced round to see if the little girl were not too close at her heels to hear every word what was said. The child was not to be seen. She must have ceased following them some distance back, and in a lively conversation they had not noticed it. Dete stood still and gazed all around. There were several turns in the footpath. Nevertheless, they could see almost all the way down to the village. The soul, sight. "I see her!" exclaimed Bärbel. "There she is! Don't you see her?" She pointed with her finger to a place quite distant from the path. "She's climbing up the cliffs with the goatherd. Peter and his goats. Why is he so late today with his animals? But it is just as well, for you can look after the child, and you will be all the better able to talk with me." "Peter needn't trouble himself to look after her," remarked Dete. "She's not dull for a child of 5 years. She keeps her eyes open and sees what's going on. I have already noticed that, and it's a good thing for her that she does. The old man has nothing to leave her but his 2 goats and his mountain hut." "And did he once have more?" asked Bärbel. "He? Well, I should say that he did once have more," replied Dete warmly. "He used to have the finest farm in Domleschg. He was the eldest son and had only one brother, who was quiet and well behaved. But the elder would do nothing but play the fine gentleman and travel about the country, mixing with bad people that nobody knew about. He drank and gambled away the whole property. So it happened that his father and mother died, one first, then the other, from sheer grief. And his brother, who was also reduced to beggary, went away out of mortification. Nobody knew where. The uncle himself, as he had nothing left but a bad name, also disappeared. At first no one knew whither. Then it was reported that he had gone with the soldiers to Naples, and after that nothing more was heard of him for 12 or 15 years. Then he suddenly appeared again in Domleschg with a half-grown boy, and tried to find a home for him among his relations. Every door was closed to him. No one wanted to know anything more about him. This made him very bitter. He said he would never set foot in Domleschg again. He came here to Dörfli, and lived with the boy. His wife was probably a Grisen woman, whom he had come across down below, and soon after lost. He must have had some money still, for he let the boy Tobias learn the carpenter's trade. He was a steady fellow, and well thought of by all the people in Durfleet, but nobody had confidence in the old man. It was said that he had deserted from Naples, that he had got into trouble, that he had killed somebody, not in war, of course, but in some quarrel. We recognized the relationship, for my mother's grandmother was his grandmother's first cousin, so we called him uncle, and as we are related to almost all the people in Durfleet, on father's side, they all call him uncle, and since he went up on the Elm, he has been known as the Elm Uncle. But what became of Tobias? Asked Bärbel eagerly. Wait and I'll tell you. I can't tell all things in one breath, exclaimed Dieter. Tobias was serving his time in Mel's, and as soon as he finished, he came home to Durfleet and married my sister Adelheid, for they had always been fond of each other, and after their marriage they lived very happily together. But it didn't last long. 2 years after, while Tobias was working on a new house, a beam fell on him. Adelheid's fright and grief when her husband was brought home so disfigured threw her into a violent fever, from which she did not recover. She never was very strong, so often in such a condition that it was almost impossible to tell whether she was asleep or awake. Only 2 weeks after Tobias' death, Adelheid too was buried. Then the sad fate of the two was in everybody's mouth far and wide. It was hinted and openly declared that it was a judgment the uncle deserved for his godless life. It was said to his face. Tobias admonished him seriously to do penance, but he only grew more and more surly and obdurate, no longer spoke to anyone, and everyone avoided him. Suddenly it was reported that the uncle had gone up on the Elm and no longer come down at all. Since then he stayed there and lives at enmity with God and man. Mother and I took Adelheid's little child. He was a year old. Last summer Mother died, and as I wanted to work down at the baths, I took her to board with old Ursel up in Pfeffersdorf. I was able to stay at the baths all winter. I found plenty of work, because I could sew and mend, and early in the spring the lady I served last year came back from Frankfurt. She's going to take me home with her. Day after tomorrow morning we start. It is a good place, I can tell you. And now, are you going to give the child to the old man up there? I'm surprised that you should think of such a thing, Dieter, said Bärbel reproachfully. What do you mean? Retorted Dieter. I have done my duty by the child. What else could I do her now? I don't think I could take a child scarcely 5 years old to Frankfurt. But where are you going, anyway, Bärbel? You're halfway up the Elm now. I have already reached the place where I was going. I want to speak to the goatherd Peter's wife. She does spinning for me in winter. So, goodbye, Dieter. Good luck to you. Dieter shook her companion's hand and stood still while Bärbel went into the little, dark brown mountain hut standing a few steps from the path in a hollow, where it was somewhat sheltered from the winds. It was a good thing that it was in a little hollow, for it looked so dilapidated and decayed that it would have been a dangerous dwelling when the mighty south wind swept across the mountain, making everything in the hut, doors and windows rattle, and all the worm-eaten rafters tremble and creak. On such days, if the hut had been up on the Elm, it would certainly have been blown down into the valley. Here dwelt the goatherd Peter, the 11-year-old boy who every morning went down to Durfleet to get the goats and drive them up on the Elm, to feed till evening on the short, nourishing herbs. Then Peter would hurry down again with the light-footed animal, with a shrill whistle through his fingers as soon as he reached Durfleet, and all the owners would immediately come and get their goats. Little boys and girls came for the most part, for the creatures were peaceful and harmless. All through the summer it was the only time of the day when Peter associated with his fellow beings. The rest of the time he lived alone with his goats. To be sure, he had his mother and blind grandmother at home, but he had to go away very early in the morning, and came back from Durfleet late in the evening. so in order to play with the children as long as possible, he spent only enough time at home to swallow his bread and milk. His father, who was also called Peter the goatherd, because he had followed the same calling in his earlier days, had met with an accident some years before while felling trees. His mother, whose real name was Brigitta, was called by everyone, for consistency's sake, Goatherd Peter's wife. The blind grandmother was known by old and young, far and wide, simply by the name of grandmother. Dieter waited full 10 minutes, looking around in every direction for a glimpse of the children with the goats, but as there were no one in sight, she climbed a little higher, where she could have a better view of the arm down to the foot. Here she peered first this way, then that, showing signs of increasing impatience both in her face and in her movement. Meanwhile, the children were coming along by a roundabout way. Peter knew many spots where there were all sorts of good shrubs and bushes for his goats to nibble, so he frequently wandered from the path with his flock. At first, the child in her heavy garb climbed after them with great difficulty, panting with heat and discomfort, straining every nerve. She said not a word, but gazed first at Peter, who jumped about without any difficulty in his bare feet and light trousers, then at the goats with their small, slender legs, climbing still more easily over bushes and stones and steep crags. Suddenly the child sat down on the ground. Great haste pulled off her shoes and stockings. Then she stood up again, took off her thick, wet neckerchief, unfastened her Sunday frock, quickly took that off, began to unhook her everyday dress. This she wore under the other, to save her Aunt Dieter the trouble of carrying it. Quick as lightning came off also the everyday frock, and there the child stood in her light underclothes with delight, stretching her bare arms out of her short chemise. She might, sleeves. Then she laid them all in a neat little pile, and jumped and climbed after the goats by Peter's side as easily as any in the whole company. Peter had not noticed what the child was doing while she remained behind, but when she came running after him in this new costume, a grin began to spread over his face. And when he looked back and saw the little pile of clothes lying on the ground, the grin grew still broader, and his mouth reached almost from ear to ear, but he said nothing. The child, feeling so free and light, began to talk with Peter, and he had all sorts of questions to answer, for she wanted to know how many goats he had, where he was going with them, and what he would do when he reached there. Finally, the children of the goats approached the hut and came in sight of Aunt Dieter. She had hardly caught a glimpse of the group, climbing up the mountainside, when she screamed out, "Heidi! What have you been doing? What is the matter with you? Where's your dress and the other one and your neckerchief? I brought you brand new shoes on the mountain. I made you new stockings, and they are all gone. All gone! Heidi, what have you done with them? Where have you put them all?" The child calmly pointed down the mountain and said, "There." Johan followed the direction of her finger. To be sure, there lay something, and on the top of it was a wet speck. That was surely the neckerchief. "You careless girl!" cried the aunt in great excitement. "What were you thinking about? Why did you take everything off? What did you mean?" "I didn't need them," said the child, without looking in the least sorry for what she had done. "Oh, you careless, senseless Heidi! Don't you know anything?" the aunt went on, lamenting and scolding. "It will take half an hour for anyone to go down there again. Come, Peter, run back for me and get the things. Come, be quick, and don't stand there staring at me as if you were nailed to the ground." "I am late already," said Peter slowly, with both hands in his pockets, stood still, just where he was when he heard the aunt's angry reproaches. "If you stand there staring like that, you will not get far, I'm thinking," faltered Aunt Deta. "Come here, you must have something nice. Do you see this?" She held up a new 5 kreuzer piece, which glistened in his eyes. Suddenly, he started, and with tremendous leaps went the shortest way down the arm, and soon reached a little pile of clothes. He picked them up and brought them back so quickly that Dion could not help praising him. He gave him his money without delay. Peter put it deep down his pocket, and his face lighted up with a broad grin. Such a treasure did not very often fall to his share. You may carry the things up to the uncle's as long as you're going that way, continued Ardeta, while she set about climbing the steep cliff, which rose high behind Peter's hut. The boy willingly undertook the task, and followed the others with his bundle in his left hand, swinging his stick in his right. Heidi and the goats skipped and jumped along merrily by his side. Thus, in about 3/4 of an hour, the procession reached the height where on a jutting cliff stood the old uncle's hut, exposed to every wind, but also accessible to every ray of sunlight, with a wide view of the valley below. Behind the hut stood 3 ancient fir trees with long, thick, untrimmed branches. Farther back, the mountain with its old, grey crags rose higher still, now displaying lovely, fertile pastures, now a tangle of boulders and bushes, finally surmounted with bare, steep cliffs. The uncle had made himself a seat by the side of the hut, looking down into the valley. Here he sat with his pipe in his mouth, his hands resting on his knees, calmly watching the children, Aunt Deta and the goats, as they came climbing up the mountain. Aunt Deta had been gradually left behind. Heidi was the first to reach the hut. She went straight to the old man, held out her hand to him, and said, "How do you do, grandfather?" "Well, well, what does this mean?" asked the old man roughly, barely touching the child's hand, giving her a long, penetrating look from under his bushy eyebrows. Heidi gazed back at him in return, without once winking her eyes, for she had never seen anyone like her grandfather, with his long beard, heavy, grey eyebrows, meeting in the middle of his forehead like a thicket. And meanwhile, Aunt Deta arrived with Peter, who stood still for a time, looking on to see what would happen. "I wish you good morning, uncle," said Deta, stepping up to him. "I have brought Tobias and Adelheid's child to you. You will hardly know her, for you haven't seen her since she was a year old." "Well, what can the child do here with me?" asked the old man curtly. "And you there," called out to Peter. "You can go along with the goats. You are none too early. Take mine too." Peter obeyed without delay and disappeared, for the uncle had made it plain that he was not wanted. "She must stay with you, uncle," said Dick in reply to his question. "I am sure I have done my duty by her these 4 years. Now it is your turn to do what you can for her." "Really, thank you. Hello." "Indeed?" said the old man, and his eyes flashed at Data. "Suppose the child begins to fret and whine for you, as is usually the case with the unreasonable little things. What shall I do with her?" "That is your business," retorted Data. "I am sure no one told me what to do with the little girl when it was given into my hands, only a year old. I already had enough to do to take care of myself and mother. I must look out for myself. You are next of kin to the child. You can't have her, would you please with her. You'll have to answer for her, if she comes to any harm. You don't want to have anything more laid to your charge." Dita's conscience was not quite easy. She became excited and said more than she had intended. The uncle rose at her last words, gave her such a look. She took several steps backwards. Then stretched out his arm and said imperatively, "Get your gun down where you came from, and don't show yourself here again very soon." Dita did not need to be told twice. "Goodbye then, and goodbye to you too, Heidi," she said quickly. She hurried down the mountain to Dörfli, as fast as she could go, for anxiety impelled her onward, as if she were a powerful steam engine. In Dörfli, many more asked her about Heidi. They all knew Data well, whose child she was, and all that had taken place. When from every door and window came the question, "Where's the child? Data, where have you left the child?" she called back with more and more irritation, "Up with the elm, uncle! Up with the elm, uncle, I tell you!" She was disgusted, because the women everywhere exclaimed, "How could you do so?" and "The poor little soul!" and "Such a little helpless thing left up there!" Then again and again, "The poor little soul!" Rita pushed on as fast as she could, was glad when she was out of their hearing. She did not feel quite easy about the matter, for the dying mother had given the child to her, but she quieted her misgivings by saying to herself that it would not be long before she could do something again for him, since she would be earning a good deal of money. So she felt very glad that she would soon be in a fine situation, far away from all the people who speak to her on the matter. Oh, and me stretch. Stretch and drink before resuming with chapter 2. Also, yes, hello Yuri, nice to see you. Nice to see you. I hope sound is okay. Yeah, okay, okay. Chapter 2. At the grandfather's. After Dete had disappeared, the uncle sat down again on the bench and blew great clouds of smoke from his pipe, while he kept his eyes fixed on the ground without saying a word. Meanwhile, Heidi was content to look about her. She discovered the goat's shed built near the hut and peeped into it. It was empty. The child continued her investigations, came to the fir trees behind the hut. The wind was blowing hard, whistled and roared through the branches, high up in the tops. Heidi stood still and listened. When it subsided somewhat, she went round to the other side of the hut, came back to her grandfather. When she found him in the same place where she had left him, placed herself in front of him, with her hands behind her, and gazed at him. My grandfather looked up. "What do you want to do?" asked the child. He asked as the child continued standing in front of him without moving. "I want to see what you have in the hut," said Heidi. "Come along, then." And the grandfather rose, started to go into the hut. "Bring your bundle of clothes," he said as he entered. "I shan't want them any more," replied Heidi. The old man turned around and looked sharply at the child, whose black eyes shone in expectation of what might be inside. "She's not lacking in intelligence," he said half to himself. "Why won't you need them any more?" he asked aloud. "I'd rather go like the goat, with their swift little legs." "So you shall, but bring the things along," commanded the grandfather. "They can be put in the cupboard." Heidi obeyed. The old man opened the door. Heidi followed him into a good-sized room, which embraced the whole hut. In it were a table and a chair. In one corner was the grandfather's bed, in another the fireplace where hung a large kettle. On the other side, in the wall, was a large door which the grandfather opened. It was a cupboard. There hung his clothes, and on one shelf lay his shirts, stockings, and linen. On another were plates, cups, and glasses. On the topmost a loaf of bread, smoked meat, cheese. Everything the elm uncle owned, needed for subsistence, was kept in his closet. As soon as he had opened the door, Heidi came running with her bundle and pushed it in as far back of her grandfather's clothes as possible, that it might not be easy to find it again. Then she looked carefully around the room and said, "Where shall I sleep, grandfather?" "Wherever you like," he replied. This was quite to Heidi's mind. She looked into every nook and corner to see where would be the best place for her to sleep. In the corner by her grandfather's bed stood a little ladder which led to the hayloft. Heidi climbed this. There lay a fresh, fragrant heap of hay. Through a round window one could look far down into the valley below. "I will sleep here," Heidi called down. "It is lovely. Just come and see how lovely it is here, grandfather." "I know all about it," sounded from below. "I am going to make a bed," called out the little child again, as she went busily to and fro in the loft. "But you must come up here and bring a sheet, for the bed must have a sheet for me to sleep on." "Well, well," said the grandfather below. After a few moments he went to the cupboard and rummaged about. Then he drew out from under his shirts a long, coarse piece of cloth, which might serve for a sheet. He came up the ladder and found that a very neat little bed had been made in the hayloft. The hay was piled up higher at one end to form the head. It was placed in such a way that one could look from it straight out through the round open window. "That is made very nicely," said the grandfather. "Next comes the sheet. But wait a moment." He took up a good armful of hay and made the bed as thick again, in order that the hard floor might not be felt through it. "There, now put it on." Heidi quickly took hold of the sheet, but was unable to lift it, it was so heavy. However, this made it all the better, because the sharp wisps of hay could not penetrate the firm cloth. Then the two together spread the sheet over the hay, and where it was too broad or too long, Heidi quickly tucked it under. Now it appeared quite trim and neat, and Heidi stood looking at it thoughtfully. "We have forgotten one thing, grandfather," she said. "What is that?" he asked. "The coverlet. When we go to bed, we creep in between the sheet and the coverlet." "Is that so? But supposing I haven't any?" asked the old man. "Oh, then it's no matter," said Heidi soothingly. "We can take more hay for a coverlet." She was about to run to the haymow again. The grandfather prevented her. "Wait a moment," he said. He went down the ladder to his own bed. Then he came back and laid a large, heavy linen bag on the floor. "Isn't that better than hay?" he asked. Heidi pulled at the bag with all her might and main, trying to unfold it, but her little hands could not manage the heavy thing. The grandfather helped. When it was finally spread out on the bed, it all looked very neat and comfortable. And Heidi, looking at her new resting place, admiringly said, "That is a splendid coverlet, and the whole bed is lovely. How I wish it were night so that I could lie down in it." "I think we might have something to eat first," said the grandfather. "What do you say?" In her eagerness over the bed, Heidi had forgotten everything else. But now that eating was suggested to her, a great feeling of hunger rose within her, for she had taken nothing all day except a piece of bread and a cup of weak coffee early in the morning. And afterwards she had made a long journey. So Heidi heartily assented with, "Yes, I think so too." "Well, let us go down, since we are agreed," said the old man, and followed close up on the child's steps. He went to the fireplace, pushed the large kettle aside, drew forward the little one that hung on the chain, sat down on a three-legged wooden stool with a round seat in front of him, and kindled a bright fire. The kettle began to boil. The old man held over a fire a large piece of cheese on the end of a long iron fork. He moved it this way and that, till it was golden yellow on all sides. Heidi looked on with eager attention. Suddenly a new idea came to her mind. She jumped up and went to the cupboard, kept going back and forth. The grandfather brought the toasted cheese to the table. It was already nicely laid with a round loaf of bread, 2 plates, 2 knives. For Heidi had noticed everything in the cupboard, and knew that all would be needed for the meal. That is right to think of doing something yourself, said the grandfather, laying the cheese on the bread, putting the teapot on the table. But there is something still lacking. Heidi saw how invitingly the steam came out of the pot and went quickly back to the cupboard. There was only one little bowl there. Heidi was not long perplexed. Behind it stood two glasses. The child immediately came back with a bowl and glasses, placed them on the table. Very good. You know how to help yourself. But where are you going to sit? Grandfather himself was sitting in the only chair. Heidi shot like an arrow to the fireplace, brought back the little three-legged stool, and sat down on it. Well, you have a seat, sure enough, only it is rather low, said the grandfather. But in my chair also you would be too short to reach the table. But now you must have something anyway, so come. Saying which he rose, filled a little bowl with milk, placed it on a chair, pushed it close to the three-legged stool so that Heidi had a table in front of her. The grandfather laid a large slice of bread and a piece of the golden cheese on the chair and said, "Now eat." He seated himself on the corner of the table, began his dinner. Heidi grasped her bowl and drank without stopping. All the thirst of her long journey came back to her. Then she drew a long breath and set down the bowl. "Do you like the milk?" asked her grandfather. "I never tasted such good milk before," answered Heidi. "Then you must have some more." The grandfather filled the bowl again to the brim, placed it before the child, and looked quite content as she began to eat her bread, after it had been spread with the toasted cheese, soft as butter. The combination tasted very good, frequent drinks of milk. When the meal was over, the grandfather went out to the goat shed, put it in order. Heidi watched him closely as he first swept it clean with a broom, and then let down fresh straw for the animals to sleep on. Then he went to his little shop, got some round sticks, shaped a board, some holes in it, put the round sticks into them. Suddenly it was a stool like his own, only much higher. Heidi was speechless with amazement as she saw his work. "What is this, Heidi?" asked the grandfather. "It is a stool for me, because it is so high. You made it all at once," said the child, still deeply astonished. "She knows what she sees. Your eyes are in the right place," remarked the grandfather to himself. He went around the hut, driving a nail here and there. Then he repaired something about the door, went from place to place with hammer, nails, and pieces of wood, mending and clearing away wherever it was needed. Heidi followed him step by step, watched him with the closest attention. Everything he did amused her very much. "Oh, Eddie, hello. Thank you very much for the ring. Thank you very much." Sorry for not greeting earlier, but reading is keeping my attention. I hope you had a fun stream. Evening was coming on. It was beginning to blow harder in the old fir trees, for a mighty wind had sprung up, was whistling and moaning through the thick tops. It sounded so beautiful in Heidi's ears and heart that she was quite delighted, skipped and jumped under the firs as if she were experiencing the greatest pleasure of her life. The grandfather stood in the doorway and watched the child. A shrill whistle sounded. Heidi stopped her jumping, and the grandfather stepped outside. Down from above came goat after goat, leaping like a hunting train, and Peter in the midst of them. With a shout of joy, Heidi rushed in among the flock, and greeted her old friends of the morning one after the other. When they reached the hut, they all stood still. Two lovely, slender goats, one white, the other brown, came out from the others to the grandfather and licked his hands, which he held some salt to welcome them. This he did each evening. Peter disappeared with his flock. Heidi gently stroked first one goat, then the other, and ran around them to stroke them on the other side. She was perfectly delighted with the little creatures. "Are they ours, grandfather? Are they both ours? Will they go into the shed? Will they stay with us always?" asked Heidi, one question following the other in her delight. When the goats had finished licking their salt, the old man said, "Go and bring out your little bowl and the bread." Heidi obeyed and came back at once. The grandfather milked the goat, filled the bowl, and cut off a piece of bread, saying, "Now eat your supper, then go up to bed. Your Aunt Dete left a bundle for you. Your nightgowns and other things are in it. You'll find it downstairs in the closet if you need it. I must attend to the goats now, so sleep well." "Good night, grandfather. Good night. What are their names, grandfather? What are their names?" cried the child, running after the old man and the goats as they disappeared in the shed. "The white one is named Schwänli, and the brown one Bearly," answered the grandfather. "Good night, Schwänli. Good night, Bearly," called Heidi at the top of her voice. Then Heidi sat down on the bench, ate her bread, and drank her milk. But a strong wind almost blew her off from her seat, so she finished hastily, then went in, climbed up to her bed, but she immediately fell asleep, slept as soundly and well as if she had been in the loveliest bed of some royal princess. Not long after, even before it was wholly dark, the grandfather also went to bed, for he was always up with the sun, and it came climbing over the mountain very early in the summer-time. In the night, the wind blew with such force that its blasts made the whole hut tremble. Every rafter creaked. It howled and groaned down the chimney like voices in distress. And outside in the fir trees, it raged with such fury that now and then a bough was broken off. In the middle of the night the grandfather rose and said half aloud to himself, "She may be afraid." He climbed the ladder and went to Heidi's bedside. The moon outside shone brightly in the sky for a moment, then disappeared behind the driving clouds, and everything grew dark. Then the moonlight came again, brightly through the round opening, and lay directly on Heidi's couch. Her cheeks were fiery red as she slept under the heavy coverlet. She lay perfectly calm and peaceful, with a little round arm. She must have been dreaming happy dreams, for a look of contentment was on her face. The grandfather gazed long at the sweetly sleeping child, until the moon went behind a cloud again. It was dark. Then he went back to his own bed. Okay, that was chapter 2, and since chapter 3 is quite long, I will be reading that this time, because I am getting hungry. I haven't had breakfast before because I got up early to read for you. I hope you enjoyed the first 2 chapters of Heidi. There's already like I think a few things I don't remember from the adaptations I've seen before. Let's put the audio back. Thank you very much for coming. I hope you all had a relaxing time. And I wish everyone is going to bed good night. Everyone has the day ahead of them. I wish a very wonderful day. I hope that you can do the things you like, not just have work, school, whatever. And please remember to eat well, hydrate, especially eat your veggies, but it's also okay to have a snack. Okay, I will see you next time. Bye bye.